Raghav Deshmukh was just a young man when he stepped into Mumbai's shadows. But within years, betrayal, blood, and a ruthless hunger for power would turn him into the city's most feared underworld kingpin. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime story, and watch till end. Raghav Deshmukh arrived in Mumbai as a young man with little more than ambition and a relentless hunger for success. The city was alive, chaotic, and unforgiving, a sprawling labyrinth of streets where opportunity and danger walked hand in hand. The bright lights of high-rise buildings and the bustling markets contrasted sharply with the shadowy alleyways and the constant whispers of crime that pulsed through the underworld. Raghav had come from a small town, where life was predictable and opportunities were scarce. Here, in Mumbai, everything was different, and he quickly realized that to survive, he would have to adapt faster than anyone else. He found work with a local gang, initially performing menial tasks, running errands, and observing the inner workings of the city's criminal network. It was a world ruled by violence, deception, and unspoken rules, yet Raghav possessed a keen intellect and an instinct for reading people. Within months, he gained the attention of the gang's leaders, not because of brute strength, but due to his sharp mind and unwavering composure under pressure. They noticed his ability to analyze situations, predict outcomes, and manipulate small events to his advantage. He began taking on more significant tasks, planning small heists, and negotiating with contacts in the city. Each success, however minor, added to his reputation, and slowly, whispers of his cunning began to circulate through the streets. Despite his growing influence, Raghav remained cautious. He understood that loyalty in the underworld was fragile, and that every ally could become a threat. Every friend could turn into an enemy. He watched the dynamics of rival gangs, learning their strengths and weaknesses, cataloging their mistakes. He discovered that fear was a powerful tool, but so was respect, and he sought to balance the two carefully. As he delved deeper into the underworld, the line between morality and ambition blurred. Raghav justified his actions as necessary steps toward survival and dominance, convincing himself that power was the only currency that mattered in a city like Mumbai. Nights were spent walking the streets, observing, listening, and planning. He witnessed brutal clashes between rival gangs, betrayals that ended in bloodshed, and alliances that shifted overnight. Each incident taught him a lesson, shaping him into a figure both feared and admired. Raghav also realized the importance of subtlety. Brute force alone would not secure his place. Strategy, patience, and manipulation were essential. By the time he turned 24, he had orchestrated small criminal operations that brought in significant profit, all while keeping his name shielded from law enforcement and rival gangs. The city had begun to recognize him, not just as an ambitious newcomer, but as a force quietly emerging in the shadows. He had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of Mumbai's underworld, understanding that every move must be calculated and every decision could mean life or death. Amidst the chaos, Raghav felt the intoxicating thrill of control. For the first time, he sensed the taste of real power, the kind that could shape destinies, command loyalty, and instill fear. The city was his canvas, and he was beginning to paint his empire, stroke by calculated stroke, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would transform him from a small-town outsider into one of Mumbai's most cunning and dangerous figures. The streets of Mumbai had never been more dangerous, and Raghav Deshmukh was beginning to feel the weight of the underworld pressing down on him. The city was alive with whispers of violence, rival gangs plotting, and police raids creating chaos at every turn. A new threat had emerged. Vikram Shetty, a ruthless gangster, whose ambition matched his cruelty. Vikram's gang had begun encroaching on territories controlled by Raghav's mentors, moving with calculated aggression, leaving no room for hesitation or mercy. The city's neon lights flickered over streets soaked in tension, and Raghav watched every move from the shadows, analyzing, calculating, and waiting. The first clash erupted one humid evening, when a small convoy of Raghav's associates was ambushed in a narrow alley near a busy market. Gunfire echoed against the walls, leaving panic and chaos in its wake. Several members of the rival gang fell, but so did two of Raghav's own. The air smelled of smoke and blood, and the echo of screams lingered long after the bullets had stopped. Raghav did not intervene directly. He remained concealed, observing the unfolding carnage. He realized that raw violence alone could not secure survival. Strategy, timing, and control over information were far more powerful. He began to see patterns in the way rival gangs operated, noticing their arrogance and the small mistakes that could be exploited. Raghav's reputation grew as someone who could remain calm in the most chaotic situation. His mentors started assigning him more responsibility, sending him to negotiate deals, handle disputes, and gather intelligence. Yet he never fully trusted anyone. He had learned that in the underworld, loyalty was fleeting, and friends could easily become enemies when power or greed beckoned. The tension escalated when a series of targeted assassinations struck both sides, each murder sending shockwaves through the city's criminal networks. Raghav noticed that fear was spreading faster than respect. Rivals began speaking his name in hushed tones, unsure whether to admire or fear the young strategist rising from the shadows. But amidst the power struggles and bloodshed, Raghav remained cautious. He knew that one misstep could cost him everything he had built so far. Even as his influence grew, he maintained a careful balance between visible strength and hidden cunning. He began recruiting individuals whose loyalty could be tested and measured, people who could be molded to serve his larger plan. Slowly he was weaving a web of control, connecting allies, informants, and enforcers in a network that extended across Mumbai. Yet despite the victories and the growing fear he inspired, Raghav was aware of the lurking danger. Every alley, every shadowed street, every seemingly minor encounter could harbor betrayal or death. The city's underworld was a living organism, constantly shifting, feeding on ambition, and punishing miscalculations with lethal precision. Raghav understood that to survive and rise, he had to embrace both the brutality and the cunning of the streets. His mind became a weapon, sharper than any gun, capable of predicting moves and manipulating outcomes. With each clash, each strategic move, Raghav's presence in the underworld became more pronounced. He was no longer a young newcomer, he was a force to be reckoned with, feared by some, respected by others, and always watched closely by those who sought to topple him. The streets of Mumbai had begun to acknowledge a new shadow moving among them, one that whispered of calculated violence, unyielding ambition, and the deadly consequences of crossing him. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning Mumbai's streets into glistening rivers of reflection, neon lights dancing on the wet asphalt. Raghav Deshmukh had arranged a secret meeting that night, one that could change the trajectory of his rising empire. The man waiting in the shadows was a powerful businessman, rumored to fund the city's underground operations, a figure whose wealth could tip the scales in any gang's favor. Raghav approached with caution, every sense alert, knowing that even the slightest misstep could mean death. The deal promised immense profit and influence, but it was laced with danger both from the law and from those who would see him destroyed for daring to negotiate alone. His mentor had warned him to remain loyal, to not overreach, yet the allure of power was irresistible. Raghav understood that ambition required calculated risk. As the meeting commenced in a dimly lit warehouse, Raghav laid out his plan with precision, impressing the businessman with his knowledge of the city's criminal networks and the potential for enormous profit. The agreement was struck with a firm handshake, but the shadows around them hid more than just the darkness of night. Unbeknownst to Raghav, a member of Vikram Shetty's gang had tracked his movements, lying in wait with deadly intent. The ambush came suddenly, bullets ricocheting off metal crates, the sound of gunfire tearing through the quiet of the rain-soaked night. Two of Raghav's guards fell instantly. The businessman ducked for cover, and chaos erupted. Raghav moved with speed and precision, taking down threats with calculated force, using the confusion to escape unnoticed. The streets outside were slick and treacherous, yet he navigated them with the confidence of someone who knew every alley and shadow. By the time the dust settled, the ambushers had vanished, leaving a trail of bodies and fear behind. Raghav's involvement remained hidden. No evidence pointed directly to him, and his escape became the stuff of whispers in the underworld. That night changed him. He realized that no alliance was truly safe, that enemies lurked not only in rival gangs but in the most unexpected places, and that survival depended on foresight and cunning rather than brute strength alone. The businessman, impressed by Raghav's composure and resourcefulness, became an invaluable ally, providing resources and intelligence that would elevate Raghav's operations to new heights. From that night on, Raghav's influence expanded, moving quietly and strategically, dismantling obstacles before they could challenge him. He orchestrated operations that increased his wealth and control, all while remaining a ghost in the eyes of law enforcement. Yet the threat of betrayal was never far, and Raghav understood that every step forward carried the potential for disaster. He cultivated an air of invincibility, but behind it, a constant vigilance kept him alert, calculating, and ready for the next challenge. Each encounter, each narrow escape, only strengthened his resolve. Mumbai was a city of shadows, and Raghav Deshmukh had become its masterful observer, turning danger into opportunity, betrayal into strategy, and ambition into a weapon sharper than any gun. He had embraced the dangerous dance of power, knowing that every calculated move brought him closer to dominating the city's underworld, yet also reminded him that one misstep could end it all. Raghav Deshmukh's rise in Mumbai's underworld had shifted from cautious ambition to calculated dominance. By now he had learned that overt violence was only one tool, and subtle manipulation often proved far more powerful. He began to consolidate his influence, carefully identifying weak points in rival gangs and exploiting them without leaving traces of his involvement. Small disputes were orchestrated to look like accidents or internal betrayals, and soon, rival factions found themselves imploding from within. His strategy relied on patience, observation, and understanding human nature. He cultivated loyalty among those he considered valuable, rewarding obedience and punishing suspicion or hesitation, all while maintaining an image of calm control. The city's underworld started to recognize a new authority in the shadows, someone who could command fear and respect without ever showing his face in public confrontation. However, power attracted attention, and not all of it was positive. Arjun Khanna, a former ally who had once shared in Raghav's rise, began to feel overshadowed and increasingly insecure. His resentment festered quietly at first, a slow-burning envy that Raghav did not immediately notice. Arjun was intelligent and resourceful, a man capable of manipulation, and he had connections that could challenge Raghav's growing influence if used strategically. The tension between them was palpable, even though no words were exchanged. No open conflict had yet erupted. Both understood the unspoken rule of the underworld. A single miscalculated move could spark a chain reaction of violence and betrayal. Raghav's awareness of this constant threat sharpened his instincts, forcing him to move carefully, ensuring that every step he took expanded his power while minimizing exposure to danger. As he consolidated his network, Raghav also recognized the importance of perception. His influence needed to be invisible yet undeniable. Street-level operations were coordinated with precision, rival territories subtly infiltrated, and key figures quietly intimidated or eliminated. Each action was measured to ensure maximum impact with minimal risk. By doing so, he forced rival gangs to act against themselves, making it appear as if fate or misfortune, rather than his orchestration, was responsible for their losses. The city began to murmur about the mysterious strategist, a figure who seemed always one step ahead, untouchable and everywhere at once. Despite his careful planning, Raghav could not ignore the threat posed by Arjun. Their unspoken rivalry created a dangerous tension within the underworld. Any misstep by either side could ignite a violent war, and the potential for chaos loomed over every operation. Raghav began to analyze Arjun's network, his habits, his loyalties, and vulnerabilities. Every interaction, every movement became a piece of the puzzle. Meanwhile, he continued to expand his influence, forging alliances with those who had previously been neutral or aligned with rivals, turning potential threats into tools of his strategy. By this point, Raghav had transformed from a young, ambitious outsider into a calculating force in Mumbai's criminal world. He moved like a shadow, orchestrating chaos without revealing his presence, manipulating rivals, allies, and circumstances alike. Violence was no longer his primary weapon. Control, fear, and strategy were. Yet beneath this calculated exterior, a constant awareness of betrayal lingered, reminding him that in the underworld, power was temporary, loyalty was fleeting, and survival depended on staying one step ahead of everyone else. Raghav had learned the most vital lesson of all. To dominate the city, he would need not only strength and cunning, but also the ability to anticipate treachery before it struck. Arjun Khanna had waited patiently, watching from the shadows as Raghav Deshmukh's influence grew unchecked. His envy had festered into a dangerous obsession, and he knew that subtle resentment alone would never allow him to reclaim power. One night, driven by desperation and ambition, Arjun took a decisive step that would change the underworld's balance forever. He began leaking details of Raghav's secret operations to the police, meticulously timing each revelation to coincide with critical moments. Raids were conducted across the city, targeting warehouses, safe houses, and fronts that Raghav had spent months constructing. The chaos was immediate and devastating. Members of Raghav's network were arrested or forced into hiding. Shipments of illicit goods were seized, and carefully orchestrated operations crumbled under the weight of law enforcement intervention. Raghav watched the chaos unfold from his safe location, sensing that something was amiss, but unable to pinpoint the source immediately. His instincts told him that betrayal was at play, that someone close had turned against him. The realization hit with the force of a hammer. Arjun, once a trusted ally, had orchestrated this attack. The sting of betrayal was sharp, cutting deeper than any physical blow could. Raghav understood that in the underworld, trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, and vengeance would be necessary to maintain control. He began to observe, noting the movements, alliances, and habits of those around him, identifying weaknesses that could be exploited. Every ally he had carefully cultivated became a potential instrument of revenge, and every step he took was calculated to strike with precision. The power struggle intensified as Raghav began to systematically dismantle Arjun's network. Informants fed him information on every alliance, shipment, and plan, and he used this intelligence to orchestrate attacks that appeared accidental or internally motivated. The underworld was a chessboard, and Raghav moved his pieces with cold efficiency. Rival gangs who had once been neutral or aligned with Arjun found themselves isolated, cut off from resources and support, their influence eroding without realizing the hand that guided their downfall. Each move was a warning, a reminder that betrayal carried consequences, and that Raghav was no longer the outsider who had once relied on cunning alone. He was a force capable of destroying anyone who crossed him. Amidst the chaos, Raghav's own network began to recover. He reorganized his operations, reinforced loyalty among his most trusted associates, and eliminated vulnerabilities that had been exposed by Arjun's treachery. The raids and losses became lessons rather than setbacks, each failure strengthening his resolve and sharpening his strategy. The city began to understand that Raghav was not merely reacting, he was orchestrating, controlling, and dominating, even under pressure. In the midst of the revenge and reconstruction, Raghav realized that the true cost of power extended beyond material loss. Trust, once broken, could never be fully restored, and every betrayal left a scar on the empire he was building. He had learned that survival depended not only on intelligence and force, but on anticipating treachery before it struck, turning every threat into an opportunity for consolidation and growth. By the time Raghav completed the dismantling of Arjun's influence, his empire was stronger, more disciplined, and more feared than ever. The streets of Mumbai whispered his name in awe and fear, acknowledging a man who had survived betrayal, exacted ruthless revenge, and emerged more powerful than ever, proving that in the underworld, loyalty was fleeting, and power belonged only to those willing to strike first and strike decisively. The streets of Mumbai had grown darker, and the city's underworld was on edge. Raghav Deshmukh had successfully dismantled Arjun Khanna's network, but his rise to power had not gone unnoticed. The chaos and bloodshed had drawn attention from both rival gangs and the law. Among those who posed a new threat was a young, relentless police officer named Meera Joshi. She had been connecting seemingly unrelated incidents, tracing patterns of violence, disappearances, and black market operations. Meera's investigation was precise and methodical, and she had begun to narrow in on the mysterious strategist behind the city's recent turmoil. Raghav, aware of the growing scrutiny, remained vigilant, knowing that any slip could expose his empire to legal destruction. Meanwhile, rival gangs sensed weakness after Arjun's downfall. They assumed that Raghav had overextended himself and that cracks were beginning to appear in his organization. Small-scale skirmishes erupted across the city, each one carefully orchestrated to probe Raghav's defenses. He responded not with reckless force but with strategy, using the disturbances to lure rival gang members into traps, turning their aggression against them. Bodies began to accumulate in back alleys and abandoned warehouses, each death sending a clear message. The shadow of Raghav Deshmukh loomed over the city, untouchable yet omnipresent. Raghav also recognized that Meera Joshi represented a different kind of threat, one that could not be eliminated through fear alone. Her intelligence, persistence, and ethical determination meant that confronting her directly could backfire. Instead, he began to study her movements, creating subtle diversions and misinformation that slowed her progress without alerting her to his direct involvement. Each maneuver was calculated to maintain his secrecy while reinforcing his dominance. The city itself became a chessboard, and every person, every alley, and every action was a piece in a game where the stakes were life and death. The violence escalated as Raghav's rivals grew increasingly desperate. Controlled chaos reigned, with ambushes, sabotage, and unexplained attacks keeping the streets in constant turmoil. Neighborhoods that once remained untouched by the underworld now felt the tremors of power struggles. Yet, through it all, Raghav remained calm, analyzing each move, predicting reactions, and orchestrating outcomes with near-perfect precision. He had learned that the most effective power was invisible yet undeniable, a force felt in the fear and uncertainty of others rather than in overt displays of violence. Despite his control, Raghav was haunted by the unpredictability of betrayal. Each decision carried risk, and every ally had the potential to become a threat. This constant vigilance sharpened his mind, honed his instincts, and made him increasingly ruthless. He relied on strategy, manipulation, and foresight more than guns or intimidation. The city began to whisper about a figure who was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow whose influence extended far beyond the physical acts of violence. By the end of this period, Raghav's empire had grown stronger than ever. Rival gangs had been weakened or absorbed, police scrutiny was managed with careful deception, and his influence reached corners of the city few had imagined. The streets had learned a harsh lesson. The man who ruled from the shadows was not only capable of surviving violence, but could turn it to his advantage. Raghav Deshmukh had become a master of strategy and fear, his presence a constant reminder that in Mumbai's underworld, power was earned through cunning as much as brutality, and survival belonged only to those willing to anticipate every threat before it struck. Raghav Deshmukh had survived countless threats, outmaneuvered rival gangs, and evaded the persistent investigation of Meera Joshi. Yet the greatest danger came from where he least expected it, from within his own circle. Samir Rao, one of Raghav's most trusted lieutenants, had always seemed loyal, efficient, and discreet. He had risen through the ranks alongside Raghav, sharing in victories, consolidating power, and maintaining order among the street-level operatives. But beneath the surface, resentment and ambition had quietly taken root. Samir felt overshadowed, believing that his contributions were overlooked and that the empire's success had been credited entirely to Raghav. He began to plot, seeking an alliance with Vikram Shetty, a rival who had long coveted control over parts of Mumbai's underworld. The two formed a secret pact, combining their knowledge, resources, and networks to strike at the very heart of Raghav's empire. The attack was meticulously planned to coincide with a night of celebration. Raghav, confident in his security and surrounded by his closest allies, believed that his empire was untouchable. Meanwhile, Samir moved like a shadow, manipulating those loyal to him and feeding misinformation to ensure that key defenders would be out of position. As the festivities continued, explosions and gunfire shattered the night, catching everyone off guard. Smoke and fire consumed the mansion where Raghav and his associates had gathered, and chaos erupted as armed men stormed in from hidden points. Raghav narrowly escaped, using secret passages and prior knowledge of the building's layout, but several trusted lieutenants were killed instantly and valuable resources were lost to the flames. Raghav's survival depended not on luck alone, but on his ability to remain calm under pressure and think several steps ahead. He retreated to a hidden location, assessing the damage, accounting for losses, and identifying the perpetrators. The betrayal by Samir Rao hit harder than any rival's attack ever could, for it exposed a vulnerability that Raghav had never anticipated. Trust, once broken, left wounds that could not be mended, and Raghav realized that his empire could only be secured through vigilance, suspicion, and ruthless action. Over the following weeks, Raghav carefully gathered intelligence on Samir and Vikram Shetty, uncovering their networks, their movements, and their weaknesses. Each step of his response was calculated. He avoided impulsive revenge, instead orchestrating a series of subtle strikes that destabilized their alliance. Assets were seized, allies turned, and operations disrupted in ways that left Samir and Vikram uncertain and fearful. Raghav's reputation for strategy and foresight only grew, earning him a fearsome status that extended beyond physical power. The betrayal also reinforced a deeper lesson for Raghav. In the underworld, the most dangerous threats often came from those closest to you. Loyalty was conditional, and ambition could twist the most devoted allies into deadly adversaries. Every alliance, every subordinate, and every move had to be scrutinized with precision. From the chaos emerged a more ruthless, calculating Raghav, one who had learned to convert treachery into opportunity, using betrayal as a tool to consolidate power further. By the time the fires had cooled and the dust settled, Raghav's empire had survived, and in some ways grown stronger. The underworld now whispered not only of his cunning and ruthlessness, but also of his ability to survive the most shocking betrayals. Every street, every alley, every shadowed corner of Mumbai had begun to recognize that the